say anything else. There it is. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Is everybody here? Wow. This is a big room. Okay, guys, you in the back, stand up, come up forward, come on. Nobody wants to be in the front row, but the front row, they're actually serving beer when I'm done. So if you're sitting in the front row, like this group of highly intelligent individuals, you might get one of those free beers as well. Come on up. Don't be shy. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. My name is Terrence Lee. I'm a regional VP with MetricStream out of Providence, Rhode Island. How many of you here from New England? Show of hands, show of hands. Yay, go Orioles. Oh, really? How about that? Where in Rhode Island? Warwick. Okay, great. Rhode Island's, well, you know Rhode Island. It's so small you could carpet the place. I saw a statistic the other day that if every state in the United States was the size of Rhode Island, there would be 3,800 states in America. It's small, but we have a lot of passion. Thanks for joining us. I'm not only a regional VP, but I'm also the executive sponsor of our business continuity management product line. And what that means is I work with customers and prospects and bringing their requirements and their ideas back into the product management team for business continuity management. And I touch a lot of BCM deals and accounts across the company from a proposal standpoint as well as from an account and implementation standpoint. We've put together a fantastic panel today to talk about BCM and a pathway to organizational resilience. Everybody, you can hear me okay, right? Good. There's probably going to be at least 80 or 90 other people coming in through the back door. We'll just send them up front as well. We're joined today by 4 panelists. Dennis Wenk is the Director of Global Advisory Consulting, Continuity and Resiliency for Veritas Technologies. Dennis has consulted worldwide with Fortune 500 customers in over 20 different countries, tackling challenging, complex, and ambiguous problems associated with developing architectures and strategies for highly available, highly resilient, and secure infrastructures. Dennis? Great. Thanks for joining us.
Glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, they're going to test the microphones as we move along as well. Bill Simmons is the Vice President, Senior Manager of Business Continuity Management Program Office at BMO Harris Bank. Thank you for joining us today, Bill.
Thank you.
He's been working in the BC field for over 13 years, and he has strong prior background in technology services, providing a perfect bridge from technology priorities to business needs. Bill believes in a robust business continuity program around business resiliency and life safety and brings his knowledge to the training and execution of best practices in a program focused not only in the US, but also globally. One thing you'll note about our panelists is that they come from very different walks of life. So they're not all from banking, they're not all from manufacturing, and this was by design. I think you'll hear a good flavor of variety in their responses and some of their opposing opinions. Jean Burkle is the Director of Business Resilience for National Grid. Jean brings an even more unique perspective in that in National Grid, they also care about the infrastructure and getting your power back on. I have to state the disclaimer, I'm a National Grid customer. How many of you are National Grid customers? Oh, come on. Really? Wow, that is profound. Sorry about that, Gene. Gene is the Director of Business Resilience for Nat Grid. He started his career in emergency medical services and has an MPA in emergency management. And he's worked as an emergency planner for the Florida Division of Emergency Management and as a business continuity program manager for Rutgers University. He is a certified emergency manager, a certified business continuity professional, and a member of the Business Continuity Institute. And he currently manages a team of resilience support managers to ensure resilience and continuity is embedded in National Grid from the board level to the individual business areas. And last but not least is David Greb. David is a business continuity compliance manager with AIG. He began as a mainframe applications programmer and has been in business continuity full-time since '95. He received his CBCP certification from the Disaster Recovery Institute in '98, and for several years he was the coordinator of DR exercises for one of the largest privately owned data centers in the country. He's performed business continuity for companies in financial services, manufacturing, telecommunications, and consulting, and he currently works for a small insurance company that we know as AIG, no boos from the audience, as a business continuity compliance manager.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you very much for joining us, David. We have a series of questions that we've prepared to discuss with our panelists. This session is designed to be interactive. So while we're asking questions and answering questions, we'd like you to raise your hand, interrupt at any point to participate, because this is most valuable with your avid and active participation. Don't make me do one of those silly exercises where everybody stands up and shakes hand with the person next door to them. Just remember that whenever I finish speaking, you should applaud. Very well done. Thank you very much. So let's start with Gene. Gene, tell us what you believe are some of the top challenges that organizations face today in business continuity and organizational resilience.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I was brought onto National Grid 2 years ago when we formed our resilience team, and the first thing that I noticed was we needed more training for our employees. We didn't have any standards set for training, and so we call the employees that deliver the plans throughout our business as business continuity leads, and that's a new term that we've used. And the reason because of that is the quality of our plans was just not really up to par. National Grid has experience dealing with snowstorms, bad weather events, standing up our emergency response plans and systems to recover our gas and electric networks. But when it comes to business continuity, we really needed to improve, and that's the reason why our team was stood up and back in 2012. So since then, we've identified a training standard. We've got it approved with our U.S. exec team, and we're rolling out training for all of our business continuity leads, anyone that has any direct responsibility with managing a business continuity plan for their business area, which is a full-day training. And we're hoping out of that BIAs will improve, business continuity plans will improve, engagement will be there, and maybe the person that's responsible for those plans for their business area will stay in the role a little bit longer because they have to attend this full-day training, and we're setting the standard a little bit higher with that. So I think it's, for National Grid, it's the quality of what people put into the plans which really improve our resilience as a company.
I'm curious about the training, and then we'll move on to Bill. I think we've probably all seen during some major hurricane disasters on the East Coast, you see other power companies' vehicles on their way to that area. Being in Rhode Island, I've seen plenty of our National Grid trucks heading down towards the DC area when a big hurricane has hit DC. How do you incorporate those third-party support services with your BC plans and training?
So when our policy was refreshed after our team was put together, we had it endorsed by our board back in 2013. One of the key things that we put in our policy this year around was to ensure that dependencies are tested and verified, and that our critical suppliers are able to maintain that supply chain. So it's a company-wide initiative. We do have mutual aid agreements through our emergency response plan, which is another business area that manages the emergency response risks for the company in the U.S. They set up mutual aid agreements with other utilities. But for us, for a company-wide, for a global utility that's based in the New England area and also based in the UK, we have to set corporate code of conduct for our suppliers. So we've had our procurement teams update our corporate code of conduct.
Excellent.
To ensure that they come in with the right level of resilience. that we are aspiring to achieve.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Bill, would you care to comment on the top
Yeah,
challenges?
It's actually amazing because 3 years ago, we identified the same thing with training, implemented it, built it last year and then implemented it this year. But what kind of bled out of training when we talked more to the coordinators and more to the employees that they service for their plans is employee reliability and comfort. And you'd be surprised why that is important. So 5 years ago, when we had the pandemic scare and people were worried about some people getting sick next to them, we were worried as a company about people showing up to work. They were afraid to come. They didn't know if someone was going to get sick. We were preparing for body bags, people dying in the streets. That's how it was broadcast to us because the pandemic was coming to shore, right? So out of that, we relied on split operations. So not having all of our, for lack of a better term, all of our eggs in one basket, having operations in 2 sites, 3 different sites, so that if one site was down, another site can pick it up, or if a pandemic was concentrated. I'm from Chicago, so we're in the Chicago area. If the pandemic was concentrated in Chicago, we have suburban people who are ready to pick up the slack. Fast forward to today, what's the problem now? The problem now is active shooter. People are afraid now. What's going to happen if someone goes crazy and there's a gun in the building? And so there's fear of that, and how are we going to train that? How are we going to get people comfortable to even activate the plans if there's a problem? So it's no longer just infrastructure and making sure that we have DR capabilities. It's making sure that we have employees. That's number one, safety.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Bill. I think we see that in a lot of accounts that we work with, where making sure that people know what to do in the event of a particular type of incident, because you can't expect that they're going to pull out their phones and thumb through 50 different PDF plan files that somebody once told them that they should be looking at in the event of an emergency. It's just not realistic. Dennis, would you care to comment on top challenges at Veritas?
Sure. So I'm going to take a little global perspective rather than top challenges.
We're counting on that.
So my perspective is that IT has become the backbone of commerce. And the risks, unknowingly, most of the organizations today that I see, that I work with, my customers when I go out and talk with them, have transferred most of that risk to the IT infrastructure. That's where the risk relies. And so the biggest challenge that I see is there's many ways that you can fail. There's a whole heck of a lot of complexity within IT today. We don't have time to fail any longer. We don't have time to recover. So we need to take the risk out of our systems so that we can not have to put in recovery processes, right? I'm looking for, rather than recover, it's about not failing in the first place. So I have to agree with things that I've read from what Forrester is saying, is that the big challenge for business continuity is keeping up with all the evolving risks that are out there today.
We see differences of where those BCM operations reside, and I'm curious from the audience. BCM teams usually reside in one of 2 places. They're part of the operational risk organization in the company, or they're part of the IT organization in the company. How many of you have op-risk BCM programs, or BCM is within op-risk? Okay, and are the rest in IT? Any other places in the business that BCM exists that I didn't mention?
We actually operate independently, so we're not in either
So
one
who
of
do
the
you
spaces.
report up to?
We report up to the country head. So
Okay.
our office is in the U.S. We also have a sister office in Enterprise, which is in Canada.
Right.
They report into op-risk. Our group in the U.S.
Okay.
actually reports just to the country head. So that makes us in a unique position to where we can look at both the second line and the first line. We're kind of that in between.
Very
Help
interesting.
that. And it's actually worked out for the better.
Yeah.
We have a separate technology risk organization, and it reports into that. So to your point,
Part of technology risk?
we do it very much.
Okay, very interesting. Great, thank you for sharing. Thanks very much. Let's talk about BIAs. there's been a lot written about
Terry?
BIAs and,
Can I weigh in on the first?
yeah, oh, I'm sorry, absolutely. Go right ahead.
I just want to mention several things that are, I think, certainly not confined to AIG. It just happens that I've recently finished reading a very interesting but disturbing book called The Shallows, written several years ago by a man named Nicholas Carr. The book is basically about the revolution in the way we think as a result of the digital world in general and the internet in particular. It is, our use of the internet is not only changing how we think, it's also changing the physical structure of our brains. We have, the internet is very execution driven, based on clicks by design. The more clicks there are, the more money Google makes. The result, in terms of the effect of the human mind, is that execution increases, but retention and comprehension decrease. An interesting byproduct is that there's strong evidence that our culture is starting to lose, for instance, the ability to even write in cursive because of our use of internet and computer technology. This is, I think, going to be a growing challenge enterprise-wide, but I think it will also be bound to have an effect on our business continuity planning, how we write those plans in the first place, and how we intend them to be executed. It's a very good book that I would recommend to all of you, The Shallows. The second challenge also has to do with the human element, but in the area of demographics. As you may be aware, every day in this country now, 10,000 Americans become eligible for Social Security. That started in 2008 with the oldest of the baby boomers, and it's something that's going to continue through 2016. 10,000 more Americans every day eligible, theoretically, to retire. Our business continuity plans need to take this into account. How will these people be replaced? What contingency plans do we have to take into account an increasing number of retirees? And the final trend I want to mention, it comes from something that AIG's CIO said not too long ago in a town hall meeting with all of us. He said, every company is now a technology company. I think there's a lot of truth to that, and what that means for business continuity is that the continuity or the recovery of the data center is becoming more and more closely identified with the continuity or recovery of the enterprise as a whole. Thanks,
Excellent.
Terry.
Thanks very much. Let's talk about BIAs, and we're going to start with Dennis. Tell us your thoughts on BIAs. Do you
Sure.
think they are effective? Do you think they're biased? Do you think they're useful?
Why would I think that? How many people do BIAs? All right. I've been doing BIAs since 1983, and so I wanted to review the new ISO standard, the 22317 ISO standard on BIAs to see what's changed. And much to my chagrin, not much. Right? When we're looking at business resilience, my gut feel, my opinion is BIAs are dysfunctional. And they're dysfunctional because of this. They're based on worst case scenarios. What is the worst case if something happens? And that is dysfunctional when you use that for resilience. And let me give you a couple of quick examples. Let's say that you have $200. You put $100 in a cardboard carton. You put another $100 in a fireproof safe. Now you do your BIA on a fireproof safe. Worst case condition is you lose $100. You do your BIA on a cardboard carton. Worst case is you lose $100. But we know that we're probably not as safe as we could be with that $100 that's in the fireproof safe. I'm sorry, the $100 that's in the cardboard carton. So you take that $100, take that cardboard carton, put it in a fireproof safe. You feel pretty good about it. What did you just do? Do the BIA on a fireproof safe, and you now have a $200 worst case scenario if you lose that fireproof safe. So are we really, is the fireproof safe really $200, $100 twice as critical as it was before we put that other $100 in there? Or should we be looking for another cardboard carton with $100 in it somewhere and spending our money there? The other example is this. $1,000 loss is worse than a $500 loss all the time. Can we agree on that? But if you have to make a business decision about reducing a risk, $1,000 risk that has a 20% chance of occurring, and reducing a $500 risk that has a 50-50 chance of occurring, the best bet is you take the $500 risk, not the $1,000 one. Focus on the worst case condition, because the expected loss of the $500 risk is $250, and the expected loss of the $1,000 risk is only $200. So I think what we have is a dysfunctional process that points us to those large catastrophic events, and we're ignoring the smaller events that hurt us and can actually put us out of business.
Thank you. David, would you care to weigh in?
Yes, thank you. I may, at least at this point in time, be a little bit bigger fan of the BIA than Dennis is. Admittedly, the BIA is coming in for, I think, more and more criticism these days, and some of it may be justified. There's a consulting group out there called the William Travis Group. They've put together a very interesting tool which they call the Iterative Business Process Decomposition, IBPD. And it is designed to address what they say are the 6 fundamental flaws in the BIA. I admit that the BIA isn't perfect, but I think it still has real value in identifying for us, especially at the business unit, at the process, and at the application level, identifying the value of what needs to be protected. Is it a risk mitigation tool? In its essence, I don't think so. I think it's part of a risk mitigation process and provides valuable information about what are the things that we need to mitigate risks to. One thing about the BIAs that I've encountered at AIG and never have anywhere else, in the individual business unit BIAs, the business unit heads who are filling those out are asked to basically give us their guess, their idea of what their RTO is or should be for a given application or a given process. That's the first time I've ever seen a BIA that solicits that kind of opinion response from the owners of the survey. And so I'm just curious, for those of you out there who do BIAs, who have BIAs in your companies, how many of you ask them, what do you think the RTO should be for this process or application? Is there anyone else out there that does that? Some of you? Okay. All right. Thanks, Terry.
Thanks very much. You want to weigh in, Bill?
Yeah, actually, I actually agree with both gentlemen in that.
You can't.
Well, here's the thing. So I'm in the middle. So yeah. So I think the BIA is dysfunctional at the operational level, but I think it's very functional at the business unit level. So there's 2 schools of thought. Where do you place the BIA? For us, we placed it at the business unit level simply because of what David was saying, that you need to ask these questions of the people in the business unit. They need to look at their applications, they need to look at their processes, and they need to determine what their RTO is. If you do it on a higher level, it's not going to be as functional because now you're doing generalization across the business lines. You need to bring it down to the business unit level in order for it to really function the way it's supposed to function. The BIA needs to be updated. We've took it upon ourselves to update it. We kind of broke out the risk assessment, made the risk assessment address the smaller things like fire, like power outages, like flooding, like tornadoes, because that's really what disrupts your business, not a hole in the data center. The likelihood of that happening is very, very limited. But actually, a fire on our floor could take out our business, depending on what the business is and where they are. So we've broken out the risk assessment to address those types of things.
So let me ask this. The UN Department on Disaster Risk, it's dysfunctional? The UN may be, but they have statistics, right? So using the statistics from the UN Department on Disaster risks in 2015 cost businesses $66 billion. Floods, fires, hurricanes, and tornadoes, all the things you said that you kind of focused on. IT failures cost organizations $6.2 trillion a year. That's 100 times more than floods, fires, hurricanes, and tornadoes. If we spent more of our time on those smaller risks, not the large worst case consequences, but the $500 that we have in the cardboard carton, rather than the $1,000 that we have in the fireproof safe, we may be better off. And I think the BIA points us to floods, fires, hurricanes, and tornadoes because it's worst case. The worst case is actually something that's happening much more frequently rather than that single occurrence loss that we have because of a flood, fire, hurricane, or tornado. So just a little difference of how I see what's happening with the BIA. It's focusing us on the wrong problem. And we can no longer afford that to happen because we're in a different business today. IT is functioning too fast.
I think that leads us into our next question, which is about the different types of continuity responses, recovery strategies, and planning that organizations can leverage to achieve a cohesive and streamlined organizational resilience posture. In particular, and we talked about this in our planning calls, how does operational resiliency involve the second line of defense, and how do you build and test your plans accordingly? Bill, why don't we start with you?
Yeah.
Because you're in the middle.
So the second line really does all the governance, does all the guidelines for what's in the first line. What we did was we made a interim, not really an interim, a 1B group, which basically helps bridge the gap between the second line and the first line. I think what's missing is really for all of our organizations is crisis management. We focus a lot on business continuity. We focus a lot on the second line and the rules and regulations of risk and all the things that are associated with that, but we forget about crisis management. And crisis management, why that's important is because when these things happen, what's going to be our response? And we don't train our executives, we don't train our C-level group to really learn how to really make those decisions in a crisis. And what we've, part of our training was that we've broken it out into actually train our executives, do tabletop exercises for them to actually start to think through a lot of these issues. What hurt Target? What hurt Sony? Was their response? It wasn't so much the email leak. It wasn't so much the credit cards, because that's going to happen. But what is different between a successful recovery and a non-successful recovery a lot of times is the crisis management. And that's what's missing, and that's what I feel is missing from organizations organizational resilience because they don't know how to make those decisions quick, fast, in a hurry, and that's what especially her target, CEO, CFO fired. They took too long to respond to it. The corporate communications didn't know what to put out. But if you train these things, and if you train them how to respond, when to respond, it would help us out tremendously.
And I think going back to the point that Dennis made earlier about loss and the financial impact, the loss from a reputational risk can be far greater. You're not factoring in floods and hurricanes the loss of human life. But if you look at the case of an organization like Target, it took them pretty much 2 years to get back to a level of revenue and customer confidence where they were comfortable saying, okay, we think we're back on track. But that can bring down a company. Do you have a comment?
Obviously, Target's a very big issue, crisis issue, but is it a BCP issue? Okay, you still, I wouldn't categorize that as a BCP issue.
Yes, and that's really the common thinking that it's not. But in my
Definitely a crisis management situation, but to me they're slightly different.
Well, see, to me, so what we did when we broke out the risk assessment is that we put reputational risk in that assessment. So when you're down, depending on your department, what is your reputational risk? How long before that starts to bleed? So you put that into your business continuity plan. So if your plan is, if we're down, this is how we're going to respond, because if we don't respond in a timely fashion, we are going to have reputational risk. So it became, we made it a business continuity issue because you needed to address it. And
So your organization wasn't, the BCM team wasn't responsible for reputational risk as a whole. It was from a BC and a continuity, recovery of operations.
Right.
These are reputational issues that we need to
Right.
deal
So
with.
we built that in.
Okay. Yeah?
I have a question to all of you because you guys, I think that it went to challenges and all that. First of all, in all your organizations, is it clearly defined what is a BCP event? When is it called a BCP event? And who decides that? And there are two approaches I've seen. One is it's written down in some sort of a risk appetite statement that if ABC happens, it's a BCP, or if ABC happens, these 10 people will get together in a room, and if majority says it's a BCP, it's a BCP. So how do you guys, first of all, say it's a BCPD? How do you guys come to that?
Gene?
So we develop our plans based on the business area. It's process-based plan. If they can't continue the process, then they activate their plan. Each plan has a plan owner. And within the plan, there's an incident management team or a recovery manager. But it all comes down for us is your ability to manage, can continue that process that's within your maximum tolerable period of downtime. One of the things that is difficult for us as a company is to identifying where people, because we're so big, is identifying when people actually activate their plans. So a routine upgrade in our SAP system, they actually activate their plans, but it's not a true activation. It's a planned outage or it's a planned upgrade. So we're trying to work with our continuity leads and trying to get that information from the business, because sometimes they're not really willing to give that information out, or they just don't know that they're supposed to. We're trying to incorporate that into our learning and our lessons learned. So when we do exercising or when we offer an after-action review format for the business, they can use that and we can identify lessons learned.
And we're actually regulated. I mean, the financial industry, we're regulated by the FFIEC rules. So that tells us what a BCP is, what a BIA is, what a risk assessment is. And we take that knowledge, train it to our group so that they know how to properly form a BCP. And the BCP is by operational group. And then going down to by department level, depending on what their processes are. So if you do similar processes within a group, you get categorized into, and we build a plan based upon that.
So you're the one who say, now it's a BCP event.
Yes, because when we take that from the second line, which is the risk and those guidelines, we as a 1B group, we will take it and we will implement it into the first line, which is the business groups, which is weird, but.
Excellent. Thank you, Bill. Gene, I wanted to come back to something we were talking about a second ago. We were talking about different types of continuity responses and recovery strategies. We didn't come back to you on that, in particular about operational resiliency and that second line of defense. Would you comment on that? What are you doing with regards to involving the second line of defense and testing plans?
There's two things. We've updated, or we've created an exercise procedure for the business to use, where it has a mandate that each business area will exercise their continuity plans, identify lessons learned. It's all about our resilience life cycle. And the second thing is we're providing a threats and hazards report, and I brought a copy of it with me, and I was looking at, I think we have about 29 different threats and hazards that we provide to our business continuity leads, and of the top 10, 4 of them are IT related, and our top one is an IT issue as well. We try to provide visibility for people across the business that may not know what's going on across the rest of the company, that these are the things that we are considering as a threat or a hazard. Now, this is outside of any second line of defense. This is outside what our risk team does. This is just the business resilience and crisis management team providing this. So when you do identify your strategy, 4 or 5 things here are IT related, so you need to really focus on those IT issues, not how you're going to evacuate a building during a fire, because we have the ability, we have so many offices within the New England area that we can just easily relocate, or people can work from home, and you see a lot across all of our plans that, we'll just work from home, and which is okay for the first couple days, but we do have the luxury to identify alternate locations for most of our office-based employees. And being a utility, the rest of the operations folks are out in the field anyway, so they're pretty mobile to begin with.
In that context of building your BC strategy, how is that influenced by organizational ERM? Do you work with operational or enterprise risk? Do you share objectives?
We don't share, the corporate risks don't get moved around the company, but we do share, we do ask our continuity leads to work with their business or their enterprise, with their risk champions. We call it a risk champion, where it's at that first line of defense, which then feeds into the corporate risk register. So not everyone has visibility of each other's corporate risks, but they can at least incorporate those risks into their BIAs, and that's something that we've noticed that was lacking initially when we formed our team, that the risks weren't getting fed into the BIA, because usually it was 2 different people that were looking at those risks.
Dennis, what about at Veritas? How is your BC strategy influenced by ERM? Do you guys work together with ORM or ERM?
So what we do at Veritas, we actually quantify our risk economically. And we try to bubble up the top, say, 20% of the risk that we have to deal with, and deal with the top 20% for any of those goals during the year. I'm a little bit curious, though. The BIA and risk, there's very little congruency typically in every BIA between risk and BIA. So the fact that you're integrating risk with the business impact analysis is important, because I think that's one of the biggest areas where there can be a great deal of improvement, is that congruency between risk and the impact that it has on the business, to identify which risks are the serious risks, and then devoting the proper resources to mitigate those risks. But I do have one question that I'd like to ask the people out here.
Go ahead.
It seems to me, RTOs, when I visit most of my customers that I have, they ask me for RTOs that are, say, 4 hours. Do you have business critical systems that you need to recover within 4 hours? Really?
Yeah.
Really? 2 of them?
No, 2 hours.
2 hours.
Oh, 2 hours for your RTOs. The other thing that I run across is storage is usually 100 terabytes. 100 terabytes for those mission critical systems that we have. So where I'm going with this is, if you need to recover 100 terabytes in 2 to 4 hours, you can't even move 100 terabytes that fast. So how do you recover it? Pardon?
I mean, for us, we're a 4 hours window, but it's not all systems, and it's very limited data set.
Oh, you say you only have 100 terabytes in your entire environment?
No, but what I'm saying is we have a different data set, right? And not all data sets are critical to recover within 4 hours. Some we can recover in 72 hours.
But I'm
Sure.
running into large enterprise organizations that usually have mission critical.
Also saying the outage is, or you can't get to the data, it could be different type of outages, right?
Right.
Different type of recoveries, doesn't necessarily mean you have to move the data from one site, one backup site to another site.
No, but say you have
Sure.
backup. Do you know how long it takes to restore 100 terabytes?
Yeah, but that's one, you're talking about, again, the worst case scenario, there's other scenarios of.
There certainly is, but that is the worst case.
But
The fact is, if you have a recovery time objective that's 2 to 4 hours, and it takes you 58 hours to rehydrate your backup data, that's 100 terabytes, you're not hitting your RTO. So how do you measure that
For
then?
that scenario, there's other scenarios that you're gonna have that you have to make it.
I understand, but when you don't hit, when you have a scenario and you don't hit the recovery time objective, you've missed the recovery time objective, regardless of what scenario it is, right?
That's true. So what we found is that we've, you have the RTO, then you have the RPO. So the RPO might be different than the RTO. So what we found is that for those systems that have an RPO that's 2 hours or less and has that type of data set, they've had to move to like a more of an active-active server
Yeah, these
environment.
mirrored systems.
So they have to use.
Yeah,
they have
so
to
there's
use
no
the type system.
recovery of
So
the data.
because the bill's impossible,
Yeah.
like you said, the bill's impossible. So
Yeah.
we present that when they build out their BIA and their risk assessment, that is shown to be evident. And so then we move in from a business continuity standpoint. We move in and we say, okay, obviously this is impossible for you to do it. So now you're going to have to pony up the money in order for you, or accept the risk. So
Right.
which is it? And right, so 9 times out of 10, they pony up the money. We've started to build a lot more active systems. One side can be down, the other side be down. Mirror the data and so forth and so on. So
Right.
that's the benefit of really breaking out that risk assessment in that BIA.
Like
Right.
in our trading systems, because there's periodic backup, even if I'm failing over to the site, the risk is the marginal. If I'm down half an hour, the trades that were missed in that half an hour, not the entire.
Right.
Sure. The other thing I was gonna say, it's not necessarily all the old data.
Yeah, the exposure's limited. Right.
You need new positions, you need that type of.
Yeah, our trade is like 15 minutes. It can be down for anything longer than that, our trading group. So,
Also, like any of these BCP events, it also matters the timing of the event, right?
yeah,
So if it's in the
That's
middle
true.
of an auction, middle of, time of, so wouldn't matter if it's in the middle, if it's in the middle of an auction, you can't get, you missed it. So you're.
yeah. So that's the question. Do you guys have in your BIA peak times where they kind of assess that, where, if it's end of day, if it's weekends?
Seasonality,
We don't
things
have
like
it in
that.
there.
Okay, great. We have a few more minutes. Do we have any additional questions from the audience? Yes.
Question from, say, ERM downwards into BDC.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about upwards, but how do you experience control from the ERM function? Say, okay, what you provide is a mitigation strategy for potentially some of enterprise risks. How do we monitor and how do we track that?
David, do you want to comment on that?
No, I can't really, simply because in AIG, we're not under the ERM. We operate separate. We're part of IT. So
Okay.
we're not really driven by the enterprise risk management per se.
And do you interact with enterprise risk at all? Yes,
Uh,
other than strategies and objectives? Or?
No, at this point, I have to say we really don't. Hopefully that will change, but we don't really now.
Okay. Gene, do you want to comment?
We're making an attempt at it. I think what's one thing that's unique with our team is we actually have an assurance group, which is essentially 2 auditors that go in and look at the quality of what's being produced. And a lot of times that is providing feedback to the individual areas and saying that your processes are not making sense, or your recovery time objective is too high, or it's not aligned with the risks that you're identifying. So and I think it always just comes back to the quality and the training of people that are, sure, we feed our risks up to the corporate risk register, but We also have to look at the quality of what the granular level is too. And we provide an assurance opinion on that, and that gets sent out to our senior leadership across the company.
And to me, the question is very much around risk ownership at the ERM
Yeah.
level. When somebody's given ownership of a specific risk or risk leader, who wants to understand what actually are we doing in the BC function to mitigate that risk that I lead, that I own, and I want to see data. I want to see KRI, KPIs, and performance indicators. So I think that's really sort of what triggers my question. Because all the conversation now is sort of more we're reporting upwards what we're doing, but what is the question that comes from top down? And to me, the crucial function of linking ERM to the risk mitigation strategies that are being performed as well.
Yeah, I mean,
It's a great
you
point.
hit on it. It's all about reporting. So we report into various risk groups, and we report into the board. And so the exposures that happen within the business continuity and when we identify those risks is reported up. And so they respond to that and bring that down as far as the second line and as far as guidelines and mitigations and so forth.
In some of the work I did, they actually validated the threats and the risks that we have. And we quantify that economically so that the risk manager could either make some adjustments to that quantification or the process that we use to quantify that. So we got the threat database from the overall risk manager, and then we did the risk assessment, quantified that risk and what it would be based on times of outage times, right? And then they would validate that data and also use that data to communicate back to the board. So that's the linkage. The risk manager is usually the linkage into the board on, did we do the risk analysis properly, and do we have the right recovery times that we need to be mitigated?
Great. Yes, last question.
One of the definitions, if you will, of cybersecurity, there's no common definition. One of them speaks to the ability for continuity of operations. So my question is, in your companies, have you identified specific cybersecurity threats as part of the business continuity plan? And do you have action plans that are integrated into it? Because oftentimes we think of IT, power outage, data center goes down, comm line goes down, no internet access, and people tend to stop there. But if you think of what can happen through cybersecurity,
And the likelihood of a cyber breach
lots of
is
things that can
often much higher.
disrupt the IT scenario. I'm interested in knowing if you guys integrated that into your plans.
For us at AIG, we try to address that primarily at the training and employee awareness level. As you may be aware, I think the Sony hack, the Target hack, the Home Depot, all of those began with social engineering. So that seems to be one of the biggest doorways into an organization, much more than any malicious insight or anything like that. And so we have, obviously we, not my department, but AIG has annual security required training that specifically addresses these kinds of issues. That's the main way that I'm aware of that we're dealing with that right now.
What we've done is goes back to what I was talking about on the executive management and the crisis management. We've taken it up to the crisis management level because that's where, even though it's going to come into the bank, because financial, so it'll come into the bank, but it's how it's addressed from an executive level is how we're going to deal with it. The people in their plans will deal with it how they will, but the bubbling up of the messaging. So we've trained in tabletop exercises our executives of, okay, this is the scenario of cyber attacks. People are siphoning money, or it came in through an email that's started, now it's infiltrated the system. What are you going to do? How are you going to message it? How are you going to communicate to your downstream teams? And then how are you going to communicate that out to the public? Because the minute it happens, it's going to hit the paper. It's going to hit, employees are going to be talking about it. How are you going to message it? How are you going to respond to it? So that's kind of how we've done it.
Yeah, we actually built a database of threat signatures. All right, so we have a threat database of over 7,000 risk signatures. So we look at those risk signatures to see if we can identify what those threats are coming in, because they come in so rapidly, and they have certain characteristics that they have, and we can actually build upon those characteristics that we know are out there and that have occurred, and then we can compare the data that you have or the risks that you have coming into your system from a cyber threat perspective to identify which of those risks you might be vulnerable to. So it's a risk signature thing. We learn all the time. It's a learning process. It's built over time. So it's just a large database of things.
Are you referring to the situation where you shut down part of your IT infrastructure because you might have an APT within your system and you don't want others to be affected?
So it's a BCP event.
So it becomes a business continuity ITDR question.
Yeah, so actually when you test against those risk signatures and we see those risk signatures happening, we actually move the workload. So we just transfer the workload. So the system never gets shut down. It gets transferred. And therefore the attack is hitting a server, and that server is not affected by the same attack because we just move the workload. That shifts the entire, and then we know what's happening, right? We know what's happening. We shifted the workload so the business isn't affected, and then we can work on what the threat is and actually mitigating that threat. But couldn't do that unless we knew what the risk was, right? And identified that ahead of time that it was happening to us, rather than recovering from it after it broke us.
So is it the same what you were describing, Bill, about you're running parallel systems, and in other words, it allows you to switch processes because that system is clean, but you replicate the system?
Yeah, but you have to do it relatively quickly. So information security, we do train that as well. Yeah.
But it's very possible that your DR can also be affected.
It's possible. Yeah, and then you'd be running forever on 15 billion scenarios, so you have to kind of deal with the more likely. Right?
Perfect risk mitigation is infinitely expensive.
Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time today. Everybody, thanks very much. Let's continue the conversation offline. Thank you very much for joining us.